What's the most horrible thing you've ever done? Story 1. A couple of summers ago, I got into the 9 to 5 routine, doing an internship at a big insurance company. Driving to work one day, this one guy was really making me angry, speeding at the worst times, cutting through traffic, making bad lane changes, and I ended up catching up to him at the next red light, in the lane next to him and a few cars ahead. So being a jerk, I decided I wasn't going to let him change lanes this time and boxed him in when he tried next. I ended up doing this for a few kilometers. Turns out when we hit the next traffic light, he pulled into the emergency animal hospital, didn't even park his car properly, picked his dog up out of the back seat and ran inside. The worst part was my window was open, so I heard the dog wailing and crying in pain all the way inside. It scarred me forever. To be fair, at the time, I didn't feel like I was doing anything wrong or reckless. I didn't go out of my way to make sure he couldn't cut through traffic or speed anymore. I just kept driving side by side with the car at the speed limit that was in front of him. That's what I meant by boxed in. It was a smaller road with 2 lanes going either way, with no median or emergency lane. I wasn't trying to enforce laws, act like the police, or driven by road rage. I was 18 years old, and ever since then, I always give people the right of way and let them drive however they want. Story 2. When I was little, my family used to play a game in public places where we competed to identify the most grotesque-looking person. When I was around 9 years old, we went to a theme park filled with many people struggling with severe obesity. The game was going great, and being a little kid, I got too enthusiastic. I spotted probably the heaviest person I had ever seen in my entire life. I knew this one was going to win me the game, so at the top of my lungs I shouted, "Look at that man! He is so big, I win!" I am unable to describe the pain and the look he gave me. Even as a kid, I knew I had crossed a line. Looking back now, I still cringe at how I must have destroyed whatever self-worth he had left in one awful moment. Story 3. I don't know if it was the worst thing I ever did, but it is up there. When I was in high school, I put a firecracker in a friend's toilet. I don't know why I thought it would be funny. When it went off, it cracked the toilet in a few places, and it started to leak. My friend, who was a bigger guy, came to see what the noise was, and I told him it was just the toilet seat dropping. He told me to get out because he needed to use the bathroom, and I figured it was a great chance for the prank to play out while I avoided trouble. After about 10 seconds, I heard a noise from the bathroom, like plates hitting the floor, followed by an agonizing scream. The sound terrified me, and after a few minutes, he came out of the bathroom in his underwear with blood all over. It turned out that when he sat on the toilet, it broke and cut him badly. I never told him what really happened, and he blamed his weight for it, which gave him a complex for the rest of high school. I still feel terrible about it. Story 4. When I was in middle school, I fell deeply in love with my best friend's girlfriend. After he broke up with her, she friend-zoned me, messaging me whenever I was online to complain about how miserable she was without him. One day I got tired of it and told her how I felt. I foolishly believed that if she knew I loved her, she would give me a chance to treat her better than my friend ever did. Of course, that didn't happen. She made it clear she didn't have romantic feelings for me, and I tried to play off my confession as a joke. But the conversations continued and grew more disturbing. She told me her parents beat her, but later admitted her father had only slapped her once. She became obsessed with her weight, convinced she was unattractive because of it, even though she wasn't overweight. She began talking about developing an eating disorder. Finally, one night, she messaged me again, and I replied with something cruel just to make it stop. She never messaged me again. Now she works as a dancer, which still feels surreal to me. Story 5. Okay, so here's a pretty messed up story. The summer after my freshman year in high school, I went on a school-sanctioned trip to Chile and Peru. There were about 15 of us, including a bunch of my friends, so it was a fun time. Near the end of the trip, we were staying in a small hotel in Cusco, Peru, which is at an elevation of about 11,000 feet. We had no plans for the rest of the night after unpacking, so everyone was just relaxing and having fun. I was staying in a hotel room with 2 of my friends. After a particularly hilarious series of events, 2 of the girls on our trip ended up locked in our bathroom. It was funny at first, but I started feeling sick from the altitude and really needed to use the bathroom. Since I couldn't use ours, I went downstairs to the girls' room. When I walked in, one of the hotel staff was still tidying up because some rooms weren't quite ready when we arrived. I smiled at him and went into the bathroom. When I lifted the toilet seat, the water level looked low, but I figured maybe toilets work differently there. I finished my business and flushed. The water level began to rise, and I realized in horror that it wasn't going to stop. The toilet was clogged, and all that dirty water started overflowing onto the floor. My first thought was pure panic. I looked around frantically for something to stop it, but there were no towels. Acting on instinct, I casually walked out of the bathroom, keeping a straight face. The man was still cleaning the room. I carefully closed the door behind me and left quickly. I should have said something, but I just couldn't. From his point of view, I had casually walked in, made a disgusting mess, and left without a word. I can't even imagine what he must have thought when he later found the bathroom floor covered in dirty water. I went back upstairs and didn't say a word about it to anyone. Story 6. 3 years ago, I was going through a terrible divorce. I decided to try an online dating site for a casual hookup just to clear my mind. After a few weeks, I matched with a 19-year-old girl. I was in my 30s, and even though I knew it was questionable, I didn't turn down the opportunity. After a week or two of talking, I learned that she lived in a town about an hour away. She had extremely low self-esteem and told me she was a virgin. To make things stranger, she looked a lot like my soon-to-be ex-wife and even had a similar name. I was not in a good place mentally or emotionally, and instead of being kind, I decided to use her to distract myself. Another week went by, and she was convinced that I liked her and ready to lose her virginity. We met at a theater in her town, saw a movie, had lunch, and then I drove her an hour back to my place. During our conversations, I had told her I liked things rough and wanted to explore more intense experiences. She agreed to everything, clearly just eager for attention. A few hours later, we were intimate, and it was clear afterward that she hadn't really enjoyed it. She stayed the night, and we were intimate again. Around this time, I was preparing to move to a new apartment and change my phone number since my divorce was nearly final. I never told her my real name, only a childhood nickname, and she never asked for my last name. When I took her to my place, I used a confusing back road route so she couldn't easily find it again. A week later, I stopped replying to her texts. Even if she had tried to visit, she wouldn't have found me because I had moved and changed my number. I pushed her out of my mind and tried to forget it all. Weeks later, when I logged back into the dating site, I saw multiple messages from her, ending with her saying she had missed her period and tested positive on a pregnancy test. Story 7. My cousin and I used to spend our summers vacationing with each other's families. One year when we were teenagers, he met a girl on the beach and started a summer fling. Most people understand that vacation romances end when you go home, but she didn't. She kept calling, emailing, and messaging him constantly up to 15 times a day. She said she loved him and even talked about moving to Pittsburgh to be with him, which was obviously a problem since he had a girlfriend at home. A couple of weeks after the vacation, we decided to come up with a plan to make her stop contacting him. I called her one night and told her that my cousin had been injured playing football, developed a blood clot during surgery, and tragically passed away. I might have even left that story on her answering machine. The next day, his mom received a call from the girl's mother, expressing deep sympathy for their loss. My aunt completely panicked, thinking something had happened to her son. She called my mom, and there was a huge argument when the truth came out. I had to call the girl and her mother to apologize, explaining that what we did was wrong. To prove it to my mom, I sat beside her and pretended to call the girl, but instead I dialed my own voicemail. I cried and apologized into the phone for 10 minutes while my mom listened, thinking it was real. After that, we never heard from the girl again. My cousin and I still talk about it sometimes, but no one else ever knew the full story. Story 8. When I was 13 years old, I realized I was attracted to girls. That summer, I came out to my best friend. She never said she liked girls, but she was curious. So we spent the whole summer together as girlfriends in secret because we still thought it was wrong. When school started again, she wanted to date openly holding hands, writing love letters, and showing affection. But I was terrified people would find out. So I ignored her completely. For the first half of the school year, I avoided her eyes, didn't talk to her, and pretended nothing had happened. One day she came up to me in class crying and handed me a letter saying, "I miss you. I've never been happier than when I was with you. Please be mine again." I looked her in the eye and tore it up in front of her. She broke down crying in front of everyone while I refused to explain. Whenever anyone asked about it, I said she was lying and that nothing ever happened. We're still connected on social media, but we don't really talk. Sometimes I think about that summer and how cruel I was. Story 9. I found a girl's Facebook password and logged in. When I confronted her while she was using a friend's account, I demanded a nude picture in exchange for her password. She had her sister take the picture and send it. I hate myself for this and wish I could apologize, but I have forgotten her full name and I deleted the picture shortly after. I also visited and lost my virginity to a prostitute in a half-hour session and did not finish. I had been taking selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors for a while and experienced lasting side effects. I ran red lights when I was late for the Scholastic assessment test at 7:30 a.m. on a Saturday. But to be fair, there was nobody else on the road, and I looked both ways before running them. Still, it was incredibly stupid. I drove while impaired on stimulants and think I accidentally cut off an ambulance that was making a left turn across my lane. I saw it swerve and then turn away. I still wonder if I may have accidentally caused someone harm because the ambulance took too long. I no longer take Adderall, and I rarely use cannabis now because it triggers panic attacks. I really dislike the person I used to be. Story 10. During a game of minnows and whales at a public pool, I faked drowning. I let my body go limp while being brought to the surface, lying face down for a few seconds before someone dragged me out. They laid me beside the pool and began panicking. I lay there with my eyes closed and breathed as slowly and deeply as I possibly could, while everyone around me was convinced I had stopped breathing. An ambulance was called and arrived with sirens blaring and lights flashing. The paramedics were baffled as I began sporadically panting and then holding my breath again, so they decided to rush me to the hospital. It took the doctor about 30 seconds to realize I was faking it. I heard my mother arrive and heard the doctor tell her, "He is just lying there with his eyes closed. Take him home." She took me and we went home, and I buried that memory as deep as I could. Story 11. I was in love with a girl I had known for years, but timing never allowed us to be together. Eventually, she started seeing a man who was about to join the army, and they were going to get married. I convinced myself I could not let that happen and made an effort to befriend him, learning about his difficult family background and that he had once used Hero. He cleaned up and sworn to remain straight for her, and he truly loved her and was going into the army to support them. One night after they had fought, he came over to blow off steam. We were drinking, and I brought out my prescribed OxyContin for legitimate medical reasons. I crushed up a pill and let a friend take a line. I took one myself, and I offered one to him, coaxing him into using it with rationalizations that it would be just once before boot camp. He relented, then used again the next day, and I gave him 2 more pills, which was enough for him to relapse. He fell off the wagon, resumed using Hero, got disqualified, and the girl left him. I was there when she cried, and we hooked up and dated for a month before breaking up. I do not know what happened to him afterward. Story 12. When I was about 18 to 19, I was seeing a girl named Pam who worked as a projectionist at an independent theater. She was smart, had unusual taste in music, and was interesting and fun. After a night of house parties, we ended up on my couch and began the usual lead-in to S. Suddenly, I tasted salt in my mouth and realized she was crying. She said not to worry and that she was thinking about something from her past. But after I pressed her, she told me she had been raped by her father at a very young age and that drinking sometimes brought those memories back. We talked to the rest of the night until we fell asleep on each other, and the next morning she made breakfast and seemed relieved to have shared the memory. Later that day, while we were cuddling and making out, I noticed I was not aroused at all. She asked if it was because of what she had told me and apologized, saying it was not her fault. I reacted badly, telling her how furious I would be with the monster who did it, and that I felt only pity for her rather than desire. It's never happened again, and the relationship ended about 2 weeks later while we were naked in bed. She ran out screaming and got dressed on the way out as I apologized, but it was too late. If there is a hell, I will see her there. Story 13. When I was 13, I made a terrible mistake that changed the course of my life. It involved a younger family member, and although I will not describe the details, what I did was deeply wrong and caused lasting harm. The right people knew about it, and I faced the legal and personal consequences that followed. For nearly 2 years, I went through a legal process that forced me to understand the seriousness of my actions. At first, I didn't realize the full weight of what I had done, but therapy and the justice system made that painfully clear. I began working with a therapist who specialized in helping teenagers who had committed serious offenses, and because of that, the district attorney decided not to try me as an adult. Instead, I was placed on probation with mandatory therapy. At 15, while my friends were excited to start high school, I was trying to appear normal while living with the reality of being a registered offender. As part of my probation, I was required to participate in a Scared Straight program at a federal prison. My therapist and probation officer warned me never to reveal the real reason I was there. They helped me build a believable story that I had been in a fight at school, so I wouldn't be attacked by other kids or inmates. That lie became part of my life and stayed with me long after probation ended. For more than a year, I couldn't visit friends' houses if young children were present unless their parents signed official permission forms after being told the truth. I didn't want to put anyone in that position, so I avoided it altogether. Even when people tried to treat me kindly, I could sense their discomfort. I knew they saw me differently, and I understood why. I served my probation, finished therapy, and built a life. But that lie about a school fight remained the cover story for everything that happened. It's been many years now, but I still carry the guilt. The only people who know the full truth are those who needed to therapists, legal authorities, and my family. When a close friend later told me that a family member of his had abused others, I listened to his anger and pain. I never told him my past, knowing it would destroy our friendship. I understand the disgust people feel toward offenders, and I do not expect forgiveness. I've spent my life trying to atone for what I did, working to make sure it never defines who I am now. Writing this is not about seeking sympathy. It's simply to admit that the lie I have lived with for so long still follows me, even after all these years. Story 14. When I was 14, I wasn't popular in school. I had a few friends, but I wasn't one of the cool kids, and one bully in particular made my life miserable. He would break into my locker, steal from me, and humiliate me in front of others. Everyone knew he was a troublemaker who stole from teachers in the gym, but somehow always got away with it. One day I had enough and decided to lure him into a trap. I spread a rumor that my mother had sold some antiques for a few $1,000s and that the cash was at our house. I knew he'd come for it eventually, and I waited for weeks. When he finally came, I left the back patio unlocked on purpose and hid in my parents' room, where he would think the money was kept. When he entered, I confronted him with my dad's old revolver. Panic and fear took over, and before I realized what I had done, I had fired multiple times. He died instantly. I called my parents first, then the police. I told them that I heard someone breaking in, grabbed my father's gun, and fired in self-defense, not realizing who it was until after the fact. The police questioned me for hours, and my parents were forced to put me into therapy to help me cope with what had happened. When the truth reached my school, people reacted with sympathy. Many wanted to be my friend after that, drawn to the drama of what had happened. I didn't care. I wasn't proud of it. I had taken a life, and that fact haunted me more than anything. The bullying stopped, but at a terrible cost. Story 15, I was at a bar and got really drunk one night. The next morning I realized I had a girl's number, but had no memory of what she looked like. I texted her for a while, and we decided to meet up. When I picked her up, she stepped out of her house and smiled, and I instantly noticed her crooked teeth. Still, to be polite, I went through with the date. A couple of weeks later, I was at lunch catching up with friends, and a girl sitting nearby smiled at us. She also had noticeably uneven teeth, which my friends commented on. I started telling them about the girl I had dated, and without thinking, one of them asked if she was attractive. I replied too loudly, "She would be really pretty if her teeth weren't so bad." I immediately realized the girl sitting nearby had heard me. She looked over with the most hurt expression I've ever seen. I have never felt like a bigger jerk in my life. Story 16. I am a former hero addict, and today marks 69 days clean. The worst thing I ever did happened when I had to pick up my 25-year-old brother, who has severe autism, from his special education school. My mother paid me to drive because she couldn't handle the highway. The school was near a neighborhood where I used to buy substances. That day I was in withdrawal, sweating and shaking. Instead of going straight home, I drove into that area with my brother in the car and bought what I needed. He didn't understand anything that was happening. He just sat quietly in the back seat. I risked both of our lives that day, not just mine. I was desperate and selfish. It's something I still carry guilt for, even now that I've turned my life around. I'm clean, and I'll never forgive myself for putting him in danger. Story 17. I was a counselor at a summer camp and wore a full-body green costume one day to make the kids laugh. During a hockey game some of my campers were playing in, one of the kids figured out it was me under the costume. He ran over and tried to pull off my shorts as a prank, and while playing around, I accidentally hit him in the stomach. He started crying loudly, and the game stopped. Everyone turned to look. I panicked, picked him up, and carried him back to the cabin while still wearing that ridiculous green outfit. I was terrified of being fired, so I gave him $30 and begged him not to tell anyone. Thankfully, nobody found out, but I still feel terrible about it. Story 18. In kindergarten, we had an exchange student from Peru who had survived a house fire that took his parents and siblings. He had severe burns and visible scars, but everyone treated him kindly because we knew what he had been through. One day at recess, he accidentally knocked my friend off the monkey bars. My friend started yelling awful things at him, and I joined in. We made him cry, but he never told on us. He moved back to Peru at the end of the year. It's been over 20 years, and I still feel awful about that day. Story 19. When I was young, my older sister asked me to get her a soda from the outside fridge. I didn't want to, so I argued until my parents forced me to go. Angry, I filled her cup halfway with soda, and in a horrible moment of thought, poured antifreeze into the rest. I stared at it for a long time before dumping it out behind the house. That spot still doesn't grow grass. I poured her a normal drink in the same cup and gave it to her. I also destroyed her dolls and tried to ruin her friendships out of childish spite. Years later, I had an unprotected relationship that nearly resulted in pregnancy, and I treated the girl coldly until she got her period. I emotionally withdrew from her and manipulated my way out when she started expressing dark thoughts. I've done many selfish things in relationships, including getting involved with someone who was already in a relationship, and it hurt her deeply when it fell apart. But none of that compares to what happened with my childhood friend. He was an orphan who had lost both parents to addiction. We drifted apart when he got into substances, then reconnected years later. One night, he called me crying and asked to meet. He showed me something horrific near the bridge, a tragedy involving his girlfriend. I panicked and drove off. Later, there was a missing person case, and she was found near the water. The details were never made public, but he disappeared after that night. No one ever heard from him again. I still wonder if I could have stopped him or done something different. Story 20. Before leaving for military training, I was scared and tried to distract myself by dating. I started flirting with a girl I'd known for a while, even though she had a boyfriend. Eventually, she broke up with him after we got close. The night before I left, she kissed me, but I stopped it, saying I didn't want to start anything before leaving. A year later, I heard that her ex-boyfriend had taken his own life. He had dressed in his best clothes, gone out to an orchard, and left a note. I'll never know if my actions had anything to do with it, or if he had deeper struggles. But I've carried the guilt ever since. It's a heavy feeling, wondering whether something you did might have pushed someone past their limit. Story 21. I was always the calm and quiet kid who minded my own business and only spoke when spoken to. One day, my father and stepmother got into one of their usual heated arguments. They had been together for many years, and by then, I had grown accustomed to it. I turned on some music and waited for the storm to pass like I usually did. Part of me must have been subconsciously glad they were fighting. I had always disliked my stepmother because I distinctly heard her say some very harsh things about my biological mother. What happened next wasn't pretty. I threw open my door and stormed into their argument. Before I knew it, I was shouting every insult I could think of at her. I called her awful names and said things that were cruel and unforgivable. As an afterthought, I even insulted her cooking. The shock on both their faces said it all. They weren't used to the quiet, polite kid losing control like that. All she could say was a stammered curse before my dad pushed me back toward my room and told me to stay there. Later, I could hear her angrily telling him, "I can't believe your son called me that." That happened years ago, but it left a lasting scar on whatever relationship we had. We still don't get along. The most we ever exchange now are cold, sideways glances. I think she might have even taken my insult about her cooking to heart, because she rarely cooks for anyone anymore. Story 22. Not even sure if this will get read, but here goes. In the summer of 2006, I was deployed to Baghdad with the 4th Brigade of the 101st Airborne Division. I was a 63 Bravo, a light-wheeled vehicle mechanic, so I did not leave the forward operating base much. When I was not in the motor pool, I would sit in the guard towers overlooking the city. There was a particular tower that shadowed a nearby neighborhood with lots of children. For those who have been deployed before, you know these kids want everything you have, so we used to toss them hoo-ah bars, bottles of water, and the like. A couple of days passed, and 2 boys got really irate because we would not give up our Gerber multi-tools. I asked if they wanted some peach water, a bottled water mixed with a crystal light peach drink powder. Their eyes lit up, so I poured a little out of my bottle, mixed the drink powder in, and then topped it off with my urine. I tossed it down to them, and they started chugging it. After they realized what had happened, they left and came back with 3 or 4 more kids and began throwing rocks at the tower. We called a quick reaction force to detain them, and to this day I still do not regret doing that, greedy little bastards. Story 23. When I was a kid, I was at a playground with a bunch of other children my age, and one boy brought his little brother along. We all took turns sitting in the middle of the playground carousel, while the others spun it as fast as possible. There was gravel around it, but we kicked it away to get a better grip on the dirt beneath. The boy's little brother got on next, and because he was small, we decided to spin him faster than anyone else. He started to look scared, but we kept going. I grabbed one of the carousel bars and pushed it with all my strength, and he lost his grip, flying off into the gravel. He looked up at me with this expression that said, "You did this to me." Then he started crying, and the whole playground came running. His arm was bent at a strange angle, and everyone was horrified. A few minutes later, his father ran over, scooped him up, and rushed him to the hospital. I'll never forget that look he gave me. It stayed in my mind ever since. Story 24. About a year ago, some friends and I went camping, or more accurately, drinking ourselves senseless in the middle of nowhere to celebrate a friend's birthday. It happened in Iceland, where outside the capital city of Reykjavik, there are only small villages and endless stretches of cold, empty wilderness dotted with abandoned farms. We found what looked like one of those old farms near a grassy hill in a fjord and decided to set up camp. The drinking started quickly, and our behavior became wild. We used an old tool shed as a makeshift bathroom, and by the end of the night, it was a complete mess. We broke apart some old wheelbarrows to use as firewood, and our huge campfire scorched part of the field. One of us had brought a firefighter's axe, and we decided to break into the abandoned house for fun. Inside, we found clean sheets on the beds, a working television, and a fridge full of fresh salmon. That's when we realized our mistake. It wasn't abandoned at all. Hours later, the owner, an elderly man, came home to find his door destroyed, his yard filled with trash, his shed ruined, and his field burned. He called the police, who arrived and questioned us. But somehow we convinced both him and the officers that we were innocent, that we had stumbled upon the scene after someone else had caused the damage. They believed us. We left without charges or fines. I still think about that man's face when he came home. We were absolute fools, and to this day, I feel sick remembering it. Story 25. When my son was 18 months old, I went grocery shopping with him. After loading the groceries into the trunk, I placed him in his car seat, but forgot to buckle him in. As I drove home, I was about to turn into the bank when I heard him fiddling with the door handle. A small voice in my head told me that something was wrong, but I ignored it. As I made the turn, the door opened, and my son fell out of the moving car. I slammed on the brakes, jumped out, and saw a large pickup truck behind me screech to a stop just inches away from him. He was sitting on the ground, crying but miraculously unharmed. I scooped him up, put him back in the seat, and buckled him in. I drove off quickly, terrified someone would call the police. Around the corner, I parked and took him out again. He smiled, started walking around, and didn't have a single scratch. Somehow, nothing bad happened. I never told my wife what occurred that day, and I don't think I ever will. Story 26. When I was in middle school and my younger brother was still in elementary school, he acted very feminine. At that time, I was depressed and unhappy with myself, and somehow bullying him made me feel better. I never picked on anyone at school. I always hated seeing other kids get bullied. But when I came home, I took all my frustration out on him. I'd call him horrible names, tell him that when he got to high school, people would beat him up, and constantly make him feel small. I was ashamed of how he acted and angry at myself, and I projected all of it onto him. My parents tried to punish me, grounding me or yelling at me, but instead of learning from it, I just blamed him for everything. This went on almost daily for 2 years. Now, 5 years later, my brother has come out and has a boyfriend. I've changed a lot since then, and so has he. We actually get along really well now, and I fully support him. Still, I've never directly apologized to him for how I treated him back then. There aren't many days that go by when I don't feel guilty about it. If I were him, I don't think I'd even talk to me. Story 27. When I was in college, I landed a summer internship at a local nonprofit. My boss was a laid-back guy who lived on a large farm outside of town. He was a kind of hippie farmer type, open-minded but practical. He even kept guns around for dealing with predators like wolves that sometimes attacked his animals. One 4th of July, he hosted a big company party. Everyone was drinking heavily, including him. At some point, he thought it would be fun to bring out some of his firearms and let people shoot into the pond. It was reckless, but at the time, nobody thought much of it. Being a country kid myself, I joined in. Completely drunk, I started firing wildly at the pond like it was a scene out of a movie. The next morning, I woke up to realize that I had accidentally shot and killed a small family of beavers that my boss had raised by hand and released back into the wild. I still think about it, and it makes me sick to know how careless I was that night. Story 28. When I was in elementary school, we used to play tag on a large wooden playground structure that had a high metal slide and a bar above it. One day, while running from another kid, I climbed up and waited near the top. As he came close, I jumped down onto the slide, grabbed the bar above it, and swung over, landing hard on my knees. I didn't see him after that, so I just kept playing. A few minutes later, recess was stopped and an ambulance arrived. It turned out that when I had jumped, he tried to tag me, slipped, and fell from the structure, hitting his head on the slide and several wooden posts before landing on the ground. He was transferred to another school afterward, and I never saw him again. Years later, I found out that he had suffered severe brain damage from the fall and had been moved to a special education program. He eventually passed away from an infection related to his injuries. That knowledge has haunted me ever since. Story 29. When I was in junior school in England, I did a few things that still sit heavy in the back of my mind. Once, while goofing around with a friend, I jokingly bit his shoulder like a vampire. I didn't think I bit hard, but he bruised easily and started crying with a big bite mark on his shoulder. I got in serious trouble and felt awful afterward, but the worst memory came during a physical education class where an American instructor had come to teach us about American football. He was a tall black man named Jerry. I had barely met anyone of another race before, and in a thoughtless, ignorant moment, I shouted, "Can we call you Blackie?" The second it left my mouth, I realized how wrong it was. The class went silent. I was reprimanded harshly, and I still feel deep shame thinking about it. It was a stupid, hurtful thing to say, and even though I was just a child, I've never forgotten how embarrassed and regretful I felt that day. Story 30. I was deployed, and every day when we went through this village, kids would throw rocks and shout our vehicles. It did not matter much because 1, they were kids being dicks, and 2, they were not going to break anything. The only exception was if you were the gunner on top, it was like trying to dodge bullets like Neo or some show. Well, our gunner knew the kids would not throw rocks if we handed out candy, and he got tired of buying it. So he did the most fucked up thing ever. He took a small flat pan and ash in it, then asked for my gloves from my med bag. He rolled the ash into little logs, wrapped them in Tootsie Roll wrappers, and the next day the kids laughed and were excited to receive candy. My friend threw the wrapped ash rolls out to them. They gleefully picked them up and started devouring them. The first handful were real candies, so they thought it was legit. Then came the share rolls. They were eating so fast that by the time the first one went into a kid's mouth, 5 others had them as well. Some kids threw up, some made sad faces and cried. I lost a piece of my humanity that day, but to this day I still laugh about it. Story 31, I absolutely destroyed 3 people's lives. I went to work in America for a year. I was a reformed substance addict, which I left off visa forms, and I took a job at a halfway house in the deep South Bible-bashing lands, helping mostly meth addicts get back on their feet. This place was the first that accepted my application and asked the least questions, and I wanted to get away fast. While at the halfway house, I met a woman who worked there. She was deeply religious, naive, and very attractive. She had a boyfriend she had been with since she was a child. He was about 19 at the time, and I was 26, and we became close. With charm and a fair bit of guilt tripping, we started sleeping together. She told me later she was pregnant and suspected the child was mine because she had been with me more than with her boyfriend. I regressed, binged on coca for days, and convinced myself I could not let this high school kid take her and my child from me. I created smear campaigns, fake billboards, and Facebook posts accusing him of being a pedophile. In that small religious town, the mob mentality took over and someone stabbed him. He survived with a scar on his belly. I did not stop there. I copied a tape of us onto hundreds of DVDs, dropped them through people's letterboxes, and left piles around town so everyone would find them. Then I jumped on the first plane home. From what I can tell, I was never charged, and they both had to flee town. Her family disowned her. Legally, I got away with it, but morally, I did not. And knowing the damage I caused follows me every day. Story 32. When I was in grade 9, there was a smaller kid in my geography class who coincidentally shared my name, and every single day for the entire semester, he would flick pieces of paper at the back of my head. I told him to stop every day, but he never did. And on the last day, when the teacher stepped out to speak with another teacher, he escalated it and struck me in the back of the head with the geography textbook while the class snickered. My head throbbed and something in me snapped. So I vaulted over the desk behind me, tackled him to the floor, and unleashed a barrage of blows to his face until someone finally pulled me off. I must have hit him at least 15 times and he ended up with a concussion. The school gave me a lot of trouble for it and gossip spread, but most of that was empty threats. I have never liked fighting. I did not go looking for trouble, and I do not take pleasure in what I did. Yet I also do not regret finally making the harassment stop, and it was the last time anyone messed with me in high school. Story 33. When I was about 11 or 12, I went on a trip to Washington, D.C. with my Boy Scout troop, and at the hotel there was a shower with one of those detachable handheld hoses. Being a naive kid, I discovered by accident that directing the spray in a certain way felt odd, and after a while caused my bowels to evacuate forcefully. I panicked, left the mess in the shower, and ran back to my room pretending nothing had happened. Later, when the janitor found it, the troop went into a frenzy trying to figure out who had done it, and in a cowardly moment I blamed another Scouta-boy with an intellectual disability who denied it and then broke down crying as we all accused him. At the time, I felt elated that I had gotten away with it, but now, years later, I realize how cruel and shameful that lie was, and the memory of letting someone innocent take the blame still makes me sick. Story 34. I dedicated much of my childhood to scaring the life out of my little brother. We had just moved into an old house with tall ceilings and sparse lighting, and when he was 9, I would, at every opportunity, terrorize him. Not out of hate, but because it was the easiest way I found to pass the time and feel powerful. When he went to the bathroom, I would stand outside the door and make quiet, eerie noises. When he called, "Who's out there?" I would stay silent, jiggle the doorknob, then scramble up the narrow hallway and wedge myself in the ceiling corner, hanging above the bathroom where I could suddenly drop down and scream. I also pulled more subtle stunts cutting power to the TV, messing with the circuit breaker, hiding in the dark behind furniture, rearranging things in his room, attaching objects to strings so I could yank them from a distance. And once in the middle of the night, I hid behind the banister, and as he came down the last step in the dark, I let out the most terrifying sound I could muster. He screamed, fell, and lay shaking and crying on the floor. And I frankly stopped doing it much after that, because seeing him so frightened cut through whatever amusement I had gotten from it. Story 35. In terms of real consequences, the worst thing I have ever done was actually trying to save someone's life. My former roommate had been struggling emotionally and attempted to jump out of our dorm window. Our resident assistant gathered a few of us to help locate him so the police could intervene before he did something irreversible. The authorities and university promised they would handle everything carefully, and they meant it. My roommate eventually came back to our dorm, locked himself in our room, and armed himself with a knife, the same one he had used to hurt our resident assistant a few nights earlier. We were afraid to go near him, but since he had already written a note to a close friend, we knew he intended to take his life. A school official tried to talk to him through the door, and when he shouted that he was going to jump, I was told to unlock the door. The moment we opened it, we were face to face with someone completely changed. He looked nothing like the friend I once knew. He held the knife and threatened to hurt anyone who came close. Then a police officer arrived behind me, and in what felt like an instant, everything turned chaotic. I remember the officer leaping forward, a struggle breaking out, my legs trapped between the bed and someone's body, me trying to keep the knife out of reach. It all blurred together. We thought we were heroes for stopping him, but later I learned he left school and fell into addiction. He began using hero, and instead of just destroying his own life, he pulled others down with him, introducing friends to the substance, enabling their habits, and even giving at least one person a fatal dose. It's hard to reconcile that day. On paper, we saved a life. But when I think of what followed, sometimes I wonder if the world would have been better off if we hadn't. Story 36. I've done many questionable things, but one that stands out was how I got revenge on a manager who stole my work. He took a report I wrote, retyped it under his own name, and presented it to the higher-ups, earning praise and the promise of a promotion. I couldn't let it go. I took several old keys from the stores lost and found, filled out a card that read, $500 reward if found, and listed his home address. Then I drove to a rough part of town and tossed the keys near a group of drunks. 2 days later, one of them showed up at his house demanding the reward. My manager refused and threatened to call the police. The man retaliated by scratching his car and smashing the windshield with a loose concrete step. They fought and the police eventually arrived, but the drunk ran off. My manager lost a tooth and ended up with thousands in car damage, which terrified his wife and pushed him to look for work somewhere else. About a week later, when he skipped work again and left me to cover for him, I placed a pile of filthy adult magazines in his briefcase. When he came back from church and handed the briefcase to his wife, she opened it and went into a rage over what she thought was his secret stash. 2 weeks later, he quit and took a management job at a meatpacking plant, only to cause a fire on his second day that shut the place down for months. He was fired soon after. I'm not proud of it, but at the time it felt like poetic justice. Story 37. I don't know if this is the worst thing I have ever done, but it is definitely what I feel the worst about. I'm 3 years older than my little brother, and growing up I was much bigger and stronger. We were close and spent a lot of time together, but I was constantly mean to him. I was condescending, selfish, and I would hurt him physically for almost anything. Even though we were friends through it all, I know I wouldn't have wanted a brother or friend like me back then. Around the time I turned 14, I started hanging out with kids my own age, and my brother just wanted to be part of that world. Instead of letting him in, I started ignoring him completely and, worse, would humiliate him in front of my friends when he tried to tag along. I drifted away from my family, got into substances, and treated everyone who cared about me terribly. During that time, my brother was lonely and had no friends of his own, and I never noticed how sad he really was until he tried to take his own life. That moment broke something inside me. It made me realize how deeply my actions had hurt him and how much he had always needed me, not as an enemy, but as his big brother. I changed after that. I stopped using, worked to rebuild what I had destroyed, and we're closer now than ever before. I'm 21, and he's 18, and he's doing great. He has a girlfriend, real confidence, and a life ahead of him. He's my best friend now, but I'll never forget how cruel I was. I try every day to make it up to him, and even though I can't erase the past, I'll spend my life making sure he knows he's loved. Story 38. When I was little, there was a crossing guard at my school who had a developmental disability. He was a kind man who always tried to help us cross safely, but being a group of immature kids, we were cruel. We would throw pine cones at him, laugh, and make fun of the way he spoke. One day he reported me to the school and I got suspended. My parents had to pick me up, and when we got home, my father was furious. For the first time in my life, he hit me. I felt like a terrible person for what I had done to that man, but I was also angry that my dad had been so harsh. I don't know what I was thinking, but I decided I would scare my parents, or maybe even make my dad feel as bad as I did. I wrapped a bike chain around my neck, hooked it to the headboard, covered myself with a blanket, and waited. My family was getting ready to go out and kept calling for me, but I didn't answer. Eventually, my dad came to get me. He grabbed my legs and started pulling, not realizing the chain was tightening around my neck. Each pull made it worse until he ripped the blanket off and saw what was happening. I was turning purple. My mom screamed, and they managed to get the chain off. My dad didn't speak to me for days, and I don't think any of us ever fully recovered from that moment. It remains one of the most awful and heartbreaking things I've ever done, both for what I did to that kind man and for what I almost did to my family. Story 39. Back in university, I worked on a film and television project with a small group of 4 people. It was a creative short film built around a choose-your-own-adventure format where viewers could navigate the story using the DVD menu to select what happened next. In reality, only one other person and I did most of the work writing, filming, and editing, while the other 2 didn't contribute much. I was both the main actor and the editor, and when it came time to finalize the credits after staying up all night finishing the edit, I listed both our names as directors. It had been agreed earlier that he would be the official director, but because I had handled so much of the framing, storyboarding, and script writing, I convinced myself I deserved equal credit. When he noticed the credits just before we submitted the project, he looked at me in disbelief and said, "What is this?" I brushed it off and told him it was fine, that we had both done the work. He didn't argue further, and we turned it in. Later, I felt terrible. Even though the project got high praise for creativity and we both passed, I knew I had taken something from him that wasn't mine. Years later, after dropping out of university, I still think about that moment. One night I saw his number on my phone, and just seeing his name gave me a wave of panic and guilt. I deleted his contact immediately so I'd never be reminded again. What haunts me most is knowing I had a version of the credits with no names at all. It would have taken 3 minutes to fix, and no one would have been hurt. Story 40. When I was in high school, I attended a school outside my district, while one of my best friends went to the one near our neighborhood. He had to go to an evening program meant to help students catch up on missing assignments or get tutoring before they failed their classes. One night, 3 of us decided to visit him and brought along a bag of paintballs for fun. While he was handing in his completed work, we started wandering the school halls and causing chaos. We shot paintballs at classroom computers, splattering the screens with color. We grabbed attendance books, scattering all the student cards across the floors of multiple rooms. Before leaving, we even sprayed a handicap ramp with a fire extinguisher. We thought it was hilarious at the time. Just harmless mischief. The next day, it was all over the local news. The program was shut down completely, leaving dozens of students without the help they needed to graduate. I remember watching the news and feeling a pit in my stomach as they talked about the closure, realizing that our stupid prank had real consequences for people just trying to get through school. After that, we never talked about it again. Story 41. During my junior year of high school, some friends and I decided to go mailboxing, which basically meant blowing up mailboxes for fun around the 4th of July. Since my dad bought fireworks in bulk and resold them, I was known as the fireworks guy, so I brought a powerful firecracker that was basically as strong as a quarter stick of dynamite. We drove to the home of a girl we always made fun of and thought it would be funny to target her mailbox. I set it off, jumped into the car, and we sped away just as another car turned the corner. The explosion shredded the mailbox into pieces. The next day, other classmates mentioned they had seen the blast from down the road. Then we heard she hadn't come to school. When she returned, she was covered in bandages and scars. Someone told me she realized her mailbox had been targeted because of who she was, and that afterwards she harmed herself and nearly didn't survive. She was never the same after that. I felt sick when I learned what had happened. I couldn't eat or sleep for days. It wasn't just a prank. It was cruelty disguised as fun, and the consequences were devastating. I still think about it sometimes, wishing I could take it all back. Story 42. I know I'm late to share this, but I need to get it off my chest. My parents separated when I was in junior high after my dad's affair came to light, and my mom kicked him out. I wasn't too upset at the time because he had always been distant. He was in the Army, served in Desert Storm, and after returning home, he mostly drank and spent his time alone in his office playing computer games. After the divorce, my mom moved us from Virginia to Texas to live with my grandmother, his mother. I never really kept in touch with him after that. I didn't hate him. I just didn't think about calling or visiting. Years later, he had an accident at work that left him with a severe head injury. It got infected, and by the time doctors realized it, they had to remove the part of his brain that connected thoughts to speech. He could think clearly, but struggled to say the right words. He might be thinking house, but say carton, or something completely unrelated. He was forced to retire and moved in with his mother, sinking deeper into depression. Drinking became his only comfort, even though it caused dangerous seizures. My mom had moved us nearby, so we saw him occasionally, but visiting was hard. Sometimes he was too drunk to speak, and it was painful to see him like that. He could tell we were uncomfortable, and I hate myself for that. I had always wanted to be close to my dad. Even when he fought with my mom or locked himself in his office, I still thought he was amazing. I'd sneak in when he was gone, play his old computer games, or read his fantasy books and imagine us going on adventures together. I loved him deeply, but thought I'd have more time to show it. One afternoon, he called me at home, and I ignored it. I didn't want to hear another sad story or be reminded of how broken he'd become. The last time I saw him, he talked about hating Texas and wanting to be buried in Arlington Cemetery when he died. He even said my name, something he hadn't been able to do since his injury, but I brushed it off, thinking I misheard. A few days later, we got a call in the middle of the night. My dad had suffered a seizure and passed away. I knew what had happened before my mom even told me. I couldn't cry at first, I just felt hollow. Part of me even felt relief, though I knew it wasn't truly relief, just the end of years of sadness and guilt. I miss him every day and wish I had been mature enough to be there for him when he needed me most. I know his life after the accident must have felt like a nightmare, trapped inside his own mind, and I was one of the few people who could have made it better, but I didn't. What haunts me most is that he said my name that last time, because maybe it meant he was improving, that there was still hope. I can't blame myself for his illness or his drinking, but deep down, I know that when he drank, he thought of me, and that thought will always stay with me. Story 43. This happened years ago when I was working at a large lab in the Chicago area and living with 4 other scientists. We were all nerdy guys who didn't really know how to socialize, but one afternoon we decided to go downtown and hang out at the hotel bars, convinced that was how people met women. We ended up at the Hard Rock Hotel Bar, eating cheese, drinking whiskey, and trying to look sophisticated enough to attract attention. A big group came in doing some kind of scavenger hunt, and we saw women among them, but had no idea how to approach them. I figured that if we sat at the bar instead of in a booth, they'd notice us. That didn't work either. Eventually, I decided that spending more money would make us look impressive, so we ordered a bottle of Dom Perignon and had the bartender make champagne cocktails with it. It didn't attract women, but by then we didn't care. We were just drunk, loud, and ridiculous. Around 3 p.m, we convinced ourselves that if we couldn't meet women in downtown Chicago, the next best place would obviously be the Museum of Science and Industry, because where else would women be interested in scientists like us? We finished our drinks, paid a massive bill, and decided to walk there to save money. For reference, that's about an 8-mile walk down Lakeshore Drive. Not long into the walk, we all needed to pee, so we took turns jumping into the bushes while the others stood guard. When it was my turn, I wandered a bit off the path and spotted a couple of black garbage bags lying on the grass. Perfect. I unzipped and started peeing on them, muttering stupid things like, "Take that, trash." Sort of, it was one of those endless, drunken pees, and halfway through I decided to take photos of my accomplishment. I pulled out my camera and snapped a few pictures, laughing to myself while urine splashed everywhere. When I finished, I zipped up and turned back to my friends who were standing far away, 3 of them laughing hysterically, one looking horrified. He asked what I thought I was doing, and I proudly told him I had just pissed on some trash. They suggested we call it a day and head home, and I agreed. I passed out later that evening, playing Oblivion on my laptop. The next morning, I checked my camera and froze. The trash I had been peeing on wasn't trash at all. It was a sleeping homeless man wrapped in black bags for warmth. According to my friends, I had walked right up to him, called him trash, and urinated all over him without realizing what I was doing. I don't remember his reaction. He might have been asleep, or maybe too stunned to move, but I still think about that moment with deep shame. The image of me, a drunk, privileged idiot humiliating someone who already had nothing, will never leave me. Story 44. In the early days of massively multiplayer online role-playing games such as Asheron's Call, I posed as women to gain the trust of players who controlled high-level accounts, sending them photos I had photoshopped of a girl, holding signs with their names to prove I was real. Once they gave me their account information, I would immediately change the password and the recovery details, transfer their items to my account, and if I thought they might try to use account recovery tools, I would delete their characters, sometimes removing months of progress in an instant. Altogether, I estimate I stole about 15 to 20 accounts by pretending to be a woman and another 20 to 30 by duping people during cross-server trades, and I ruined a lot of people's days doing it. Story 45. When I was about 13, my friends and I started using methamphetamine, what we called tweak, and one day while rummaging through an old drawer, I found my grandfather's Marine first aid kit with some vials of morphine in the back. I showed them to 2 friends and we talked about injecting them. And though we never followed through, I eventually threw the vials away a few weeks later. My single mother later discovered the morphine was missing when she tried to sell the kit online and assumed my older brother, who was 24 and had just left rehab, had taken them, so she accused and kicked him out that day. And he relapsed into heavy methamphetamine use for another 3 years. My theft set that chain of events in motion, and I still carry the guilt. Story 46. I acted as the middleman for a very distant acquaintance 3 or 4 years ago when he wanted to buy LSD, and the first deal went fine. He was happy with the product, which was dosed onto Smarties, a common way of administering LSD. A week or so later, he told me he was leaving town to travel with some kind of circus and wanted enough to last him 3 or 4 months. He had $400 to spend. At first, I intended to get him the quantity he wanted, but my supplier said he could not fulfill an order that large and suggested I could make some money myself. And because I was in a bad place, spending everything on OxyContin, I did the selfish thing. I bought a bag of Smarties from the store, counted them out, and sold him a handful of $2 candies for $400. He called me several times after that, furious, and I blamed the supplier and pretended I had no responsibility as the middleman. He told me he would talk to me when he came back and that he would not be kind. But before he returned, I moved back in with my parents and changed my phone number. Story 47. I have told only a few people this, but it needs to be out. I was 18 and walking around my then-girlfriend's neighborhood with her and another friend when 6 younger guys approached and started hitting on my girlfriend. I got angry and started mouthing off, and it escalated into a dare where the biggest of them and I were egging each other to be the first to hit. I reached a point where I snapped and slid brass knuckles onto my right hand. He stuck his head out and told me to hit him in the jaw, but with all the force I had, I struck him in the temple instead. He collapsed and the others stood frozen, staring at him on the ground. When I looked down, I saw a pool of blood around his head, and I was sure I had killed him. I ran to my car as fast as I could. Days later, I learned he had suffered severe brain damage. The police wrote it off as gang violence. I live with the certainty that what I did was unforgivable, that if there is a just God, I deserve punishment, and I am haunted by the image of him lying motionless in his own blood.